Chapter 9. From this time on, we applied ourselves diligently to learn our alphabet with Chender Sen as our instructor. The days passed altogether too quickly, and April was drawing to a close with the greater part of the records still to be translated. But we were consoling ourselves that we would be able to return and finish the translations. Although our friends had translated a large portion of these records for us, they had insisted upon our study of the characters so that we would be able to translate them for ourselves. During the preceding September, we had arranged to meet a party in the Gobi Desert, and they were to accompany us to the sites of three of the ancient ruined cities, the locations of which are given by some of these records. While we had not as yet seen these records, we had been told of the existence. Those which we had previously seen, and which had aroused our curiosity, were but copies of the records we had before us. Both of the sets place the dates of these cities back 200,000 years. It is claimed that the inhabitants were in a high state of civilization, as they knew the arts and crafts and were able to work with the metals. That gold was a very common metal, so common that they used it in making drinking vessels and for shoeing their horses. It is claimed that these people had a good command over all natural forces as well as their own God-given powers. In fact, the legends, if legend they are, as told therein, are quite similar to those of Greek mythology. If the maps are correct, this huge empire covered the greater portion of Asia and extended into Europe as far as the Mediterranean Sea, where France is now located, and the greatest elevation was about 600 feet above sea level. It is claimed that this was a great plain area, very productive and well populated, and a colony of the motherland. There is no question that, if the remains of these cities can be found and uncovered, some very valuable history will be disclosed, as the description the records gave of this country far outshone that of ancient Egypt for pomp and splendor during the dynasties of its 7 kings. Even before the reign of these kings, it is described as being far more prosperous. The people ruled themselves. There were no wars and no vassals or slaves. They unquestionably named their ruler, directive principle, and they loved and obeyed the directive principle. These records state that the first king of the first dynasty usurped the rule of the directive principle and set himself upon a throne as ruler. Time had passed rapidly. We were busy getting everything to readiness to join the expedition, as we were obliged to be on our way in order to keep our appointment in May at the meeting place agreed upon, where we were to replenish our supplies and equip the main expedition for the final journey. Words absolutely fail me when I undertake to record my thoughts and feelings as the time of departure grew near. Every hour of our stay had been a joy, not one being dull. Although we had been with these people and shared their homes for more than 5 months, the time had passed so rapidly that it seemed but a few days. Yet a world of possibilities had been opened to us. It was as though the door had been thrown wide open. Everyone felt the boundless possibilities, and still we hesitated to step through the door, just as we hesitated to leave these magnificent people whom we looked upon as brothers. I believe there is a time in the life of every mortal when he or she can see the door fully opened, just as each of us saw it that beautiful April morning, and each and every one can see the vast possibilities that may be attained. I'm going to ask the readers to throw aside all prejudice for a time, and if they are able to do so, see as we saw. I do not expect you to believe, but I do want you to understand that it is one thing to write about these people, and an entirely different thing just to sit at their feet and listen. It seemed that if we would walk boldly up and step through the door, all attainment would be ours. Yet we hesitated. Why was it so? Because we did not fully believe? We allowed tradition to drag us back and close the door. But we must come to realize there is no fate save that which we ourselves allow. Here were a kindly, simple, yet most magnificent people, some of whom for generations, and perhaps always have lived just through that door, and that life is practical to them. There is no precedent nor tradition here, nothing but a pure honest life, well lived, and lived right here on this earth. I leave it to the reader to make the contrast. We did hesitate to leave these dear kindly souls to whom we had become so attached in the last few months, yet we knew that other things awaited us, and we looked forward eagerly to them. We bade our friends goodbye that beautiful April morning with cordial handshakes and salutations, amid hearty invitations to come again. With a final goodbye and Godspeed, our faces were turned northward, this time actually to cross the great Gobi, which it tells of horrible hardship as dim visions in our imaginations. But we were unafraid, for Emile and Jess were again with us, and Jendersen in Nepro's place. To us, we had visited many lands. As the company swung along the trail, it was but a part of the day's work. Everyone in our little band was glad to be there. Not one but recognized that a new world had begun to open and unfold. We all recognized the remoteness of the country and the hazards of an ordinary trip of this nature. Yet there was that irresistible urge to go on. With the absolute confidence we had in our great friends, our fear or thought of inconvenience for self has thrown to the winds, and we enter into the zest of the thing with the enthusiasm of schoolboys. We were accustomed to the remote places of the earth, but never had we experienced a country so remote, yet one where we could travel with the freedom and ease that we were experiencing here. Do you wonder that we were infatuated with the country and our benefactors? We felt that we could go right on north until we had negotiated the polar regions and conquered them. We had not gone far, for when one of our party remarked, "If we could travel as those fellows can, this part would be easy." Just because we cannot travel as they do, they plod along with us. All went well until the evening of the 7th day out. All about 5 o'clock that afternoon, we were just emerging from a deep ravine which we had followed down in order to gain access to the more open country below, when one of the party called out that there were horsemen in the distance. We turned our glasses up on them and counted 27 horsemen, who seemed to be fully armed. We reported this to Jess, and he said they probably were one of the roving bands that infest the country. We asked if they were one of the bandit bands, and he said that he suspected they were, as they did not appear to be tending any flocks. We left the trail and proceeded to a clump of trees and made camp for the night. While the camp was being prepared, two of our party crossed the stream near which we were camping and climbed to the top of the ridge that would give them an outlook over the rolling country. When they had gained the summit, they stopped and, placing their field glasses to their eyes, stood for a moment, then turned and hurried toward camp. As soon as they came within hailing distance, they reported that the party of horsemen was not over 3 miles away and was riding toward our camp. At this time, someone remarked that he believed it was going to storm. We looked, and sure enough, there was a heavy bank of clouds gathering in the northwest and fog was drifting in from every direction. We became very uneasy as we could now see the band of horsemen through the approaching storm, coming down a rolling slope directly toward our camp. We were very much disturbed about the appearance of this band. Although there were 32 in our party, we did not have a firearm of any description. At that moment, the storm broke up on us with all fury as of a blizzard. For a few moments, the wind lashed and roared and drove the fine particles of snow around us with the fury of the 70-mile gale, and it looked as if we would be obliged to move our camp to escape the falling limbs that were being broken from the trees by the storm. Then everything became calm where we were, and we thought of a moment that it had been only a squall, such as often happens in the country, and that it soon blow over. Since there was a dim half-light which enabled us to see, we turned to and set the camp in order. We were occupied with some of this work for about half an hour, and had not given a thought to either the storm or the supposed bandits who had caused so much uneasiness in short time before. As we stopped a moment for breath, our chief walked to the entrance of the tent and looked out, then turned and said, "The storm seems to be raging a short distance away, but where we are, there is scarcely a breath of air stirring. Just look, the tents and trees are around hardly moving, and the air seems warm and balmy." A number of our party followed him outside, and we stood for a moment wondering why we had been in a tent and occupied. We had been half conscious of the noise the storm was making, but we supposed it had blown over and was traveling up the ravine, as some of the storms in that country come on like a cyclone and travel for miles before they expend their fury, and after they have passed there is a dead calm. This was not the case here. The blizzard was raging with all its fury within 100 feet of us, but where we stood the air was still and warm. Our former experience had been that the cold was intense and pierced one through and through, while the wind drove the icy needle like particles of snow around and along with it in blinding fury until one was nearly suffocated. Suddenly the circle lighted up as if by magic. As we stood wondering, we thought we heard shouts of men above the din of the storm. Supper was announced. We went in and sat down. While we were eating, one of the party wondered what had become of the horsemen we had seen descending the slope. Another said, "We thought we had heard shouts while we were outside, and wonder if we could not be of the assistance in case they were lost in the blizzard." Jess stated that these men belonged to one of the most notorious bands of bandits, which roamed the nearby country. He added that they did not thing but rob and plunder the villages and drive them off the herds of sheep and goats. After supper, during the lull in the storms, we could hear shouting and the lunging and the snorting of horses, sounding as though they would break from control. Although they seemed but a short distance away, we could not see them, so dark and dense was the snow that was whirled along by the wind. Neither could we see the sign of the campfire. In a few moments Emil arose and said he would invite them to our camp. Unless they were well prepared, it would be impossible for man or beast to survive the storm until morning, as the cold was growing intense outside. As he was preparing to leave the tent, two of our party asked to be permitted to accompany him. Emil seemed pleased. He accepted, and they disappeared into the storm. After about 20 minutes had elapsed, they reappeared, followed by 20 of the bandit band, leading their horses. They told us afterwards that 7 had become separated from them, and were probably lost in the storm. Those who gathered in our circle were a unique and motley lot of half-wild-looking creatures. The moment they entered the circle of light, they became suspicious that there was some plot to capture them. They showed their alarm until Emil assured them that they were at liberty to go at any time they wished, and showed them that we had no mode of defense if they wished to attack us. This, their leader said, they had prepared to do when they saw us emerge from the ravine before the storm came on. After the storm came on, they had become bewildered and lost their way, so they did not know where their camp was located. When Emil and the two from the party had found them, they were huddled together against a cliff about 100 yards downstream. The leader said if they were driven out, they would certainly perish. Emil assured them that this would not happen. They made their horses secure for the night among the trees. Then they gathered in a group by themselves, sat down, and began eating dry goat meat and yak butter, which they had taken from their saddle pouches. While they were thus occupied, they kept their arms near at hand and would start and listen to any increased sound. They talked and gesticulated freely, just told us that they were wondering about our equipment and the light, why the wind was not blowing, why it was warm within the circle, and why the horses were so content. One of the party who was doing most of the talking had heard of our friends before. He was telling the group that these people were like gods and could destroy them, the bandits, and in an instant if they would. Guests also said that some of the party were attempting to influence the others to take everything we had and go on, as they thought it was a plot to capture them, but that this one man was standing firm that we should not be molested. He was telling them that if they did harm us, they would all be destroyed. After the talk had gone on for a considerable time, 8 of them arose and came over to us and told Jess they would not stay, that they were very much afraid, and they were going to try and go to their camp, as it was located on the same stream but a few miles below. They had been able to get to their location from the clump of trees where we were encamped. They mounted their horses and rode away downstream. In about 20 minutes they all turned around, saying the snow had fallen so deep their horses could not travel and face the storm, which was the heaviest they had experienced for many years. Then they began making themselves comfortable for the night. One of our party said, "Well, I suppose they will be more comfortable here, even if they are afraid, than they would be out in the storm." Jess turned to us and said, "The Father's house is where you are abiding. If you are within that house and do there abide, you are in the glad spirit of the Father. Of what avail is the warmth and cheer that abides within the house if you are not of the house, or know not the warmth and the cheer that abides therein? You may invite those that remain just without, and they will not enter, for they know not where you abide. These dear ones here, while they feel the warmth, will not come near, for the reason that they have always preyed upon their fellow men, and they cannot understand that those same men, whom they have looked upon as legitimate prey, should befriend them without some reason for doing so, especially as they do not belong to the band. They do not know that within the snow or cold or heaviest storm the Father abides, and that those who make his home their home and therein abide cannot be harmed by storm or wind or tide. It is only when you are out of contact with God that the winds, the storms, and the tides sweep over you. It is when one can stand steadfastly and unwaveringly with his eyes fixed directly on God, knowing and seeing no other, that he can accomplish that you now see. Our thought is, I stand steadfastly with my eyes fixed on you, O Father, knowing naught but you, Father, and I see naught but God in all things. I stand firmly on the holy mount, knowing not but your love, life, and wisdom. Your divine spirit pervades me always. It surrounds me and bounds within and without me always. I know, Father, that this is not for me alone, but it is for all thy children. I know, Father, that I have not but that which they have, and there is not but God for all. I thank thee, Father. The real peace may be found even in the heart of the storm, but deep in the heart of the man who has found himself is the true calm. On the contrary, man may be in the remote wilderness alone with the twilight and the vast silence of nature, and yet be torn by the winds of passion or shaken by the thunders of fear. Nature, carelessly observed, seems to have given brute strength, greed, and capacity for shedding weaker animals' blood, an incomparable advantage. But notice the following simple facts that few have thought about. There are more lambs in the world than lions. That is not an accident. Nature is not blind, blundering thing. Nature is God at work, and God neither wastes material nor does he blunder in his building. Does it not strike you as a strange thing that, in the melting pot of nature's primal force, the lion had not eaten up the lamb before man appeared upon the scene? The lamb has literally whipped the lion in the struggle for existence. Nor is it man's siding with the lamb against the lion that explains the result. In all probability, man began his career of slaughter by killing the docile first. It is certain that he kills more lambs than lions. It is not man, but nature that pronounces condemnations of lion's kin. Reflect a moment, and you will see that nature cannot give instinctive strength in opposite directions to the same animal. The lion is a great fighter, but a slow breeder. All the strength of this fine body goes to fighting form. Having young is detrimental and becomes the incident of life. The lamb, on the other hand, is not a fighter and therefore is weak. The lamb spends no energy in fighting and accordingly is a better breeder. Nature acknowledges that in creating the lion she made a mistake. She is correcting that mistake. The lion and all other animals whose instinct is to kill are disappearing. There are no exceptions to this sentence of extinction pronounced by nature's immutable law against all beings of the preying kind. Nature rules according to the eternal equity and by the very law of the universe. The fighter fights a losing battle, always has and always will, whether he be the animal or the animal man. In the forest or in the city, now and forever, the lion loses. He loses when he wins. He dies when he kills. He is by the very nature of things eating his own kind when he rends the warm flesh of the lamb he tore from the flock. When the first lion struck his prey with his mighty paw and growled through his bloody chops, the delight he felt. He was singing, not the death of the helpless that he was eating, but the funeral hymn of his own kind. Savagery is a poor rallying point. Lions do not herd. Bears do not go in flocks. Savages among men from small groups and fight each other. Wildness turns on its own kind among the beasts or men and is the source of weakness. In the analogy of things, wild beasts must go. No great soldier ever really conquered anything. His victories are all illusions. Soldier empires, if they rest on nothing more substantial than the sword, swiftly fall to pieces. In the end, the soldiers must repudiate force and resort to justice and reason, for the empires crumble. The beast of prey, whether he is brute or human, is solitary, hopeless, and helpless, irrevocably doomed. For gentleness is the real strength. Gentleness in lion, with all the lion's attributes, except the taste for blood, and slowly all life is coming beneath its all-conquering rule. Man is made for or unmade by himself. In the armory of thought, he forges the weapons by which he destroys himself. He also fashions the tools with which he builds for himself heavenly mansions of joy, strength, and peace. By the right choice and the true application of thought, man ascends to the divine perfection. By the abused and wrong application of thought, he descends below the level of the beast. Between the two extremes are all of the grades of character, and man is their maker and master. These bandits are the remnants of a once great and prosperous people. Their forefathers inhabited this country when it was a beautiful, thriving industrial empire. They knew the science and arts. They also knew their own origin and power, and they worshipped that origin and power only. There came a time when they began to look to the body for pleasure, and in time the body failed them. Then a great cataclysm swept over the land and devastating and leaving only a few scattered people on the higher ground. These developed into communities and became a larger races of Europe. The region where we are and that the Gobi were cut off and razed bodily until nothing grew. The people were so nearly destroyed that there were only a few isolated communities, and at times only one or two families left. These gathered in bands and are the ancestors of the present people. They cannot prosper as they are continually at war with each other, while their history and origin have been forgotten. Their religion and legends can be traced to one source. Wherever you find them, you will find some of the fundamentals alike, although their forms differ widely. Here Jess said that he feared he had already wearied us. All of our friends were fast asleep. We looked at the direction of the bandits, and sure enough, they were all asleep. They all well as we had forgotten the storm, which was still unabated. We went into the tent and retired again, thankful to our great friends. When we awoke the next morning, the sun was shining, and the whole camp was astir. We dressed hastily and went out to find that the company, the bandits and all, were waiting for us. At breakfast we were told that it had been arranged we should travel as far as the bandits' camp together, as it would be easier to break trail when we all together. The bandits seemed pleased at the prospect, but I cannot say we were, for we were told that they were about 150 at their camp. By the time we had finished breakfast, all vestige of the storm had passed. So we broke camp and started out with the bandits and their horses to break trail, leaving the others to follow with the camp equipment. Although the bandits' camp was not over 12 miles down the river, they did not reach there until after midday. When we were only too pleased to stop for a little rest, we found the camp very comfortable, with ample room to accommodate all our party. After lunch, it was decided that we could make better headway if we waited a day or two to allow the new snow that had fallen to settle, as we would be obliged to cross the divide of about 14,000 feet elevation the next day. The weather did not prove to be as warm as expected, so our stay was prolonged for 4 days. The whole village treated us with the greatest respect and did everything in their power to make our stay comfortable. When we were leaving, 2 of the men asked if they could join the party. As we were expecting to recruit a number of helpers in the next large village about 70 miles farther on, we gladly accepted them, and they were with us until we returned that fall. When we left the village, nearly 1/2 of the population accompanied us to the summit of the high divide in order to assist in breaking trail through the deep snow, and we were very thankful for their kindly efforts, as it proved a very difficult ascent. At the summit, we bade farewell to our bandit friends and went on to the appointed meeting place, arriving there May 28th, 3 days after the arrival of the friends we had made appointment with the fall before.